Ethan had always dreamed of owning a quiet place far away from the rush of the city. Since childhood, he imagined waking up to open land, empty fields, and a peaceful sky. But life kept him inside offices, surrounded by noise, screens, and deadlines. Years passed, and his dream stayed only a picture in his mind. Still, he worked hard and saved whatever he could. He believed that one day, when the time was right, he would finally buy a small piece of land where he could breathe freely. That day arrived when he heard about an abandoned ranch for sale just outside a small town. The ranch had been empty for over 10 years. People said the last owner moved away suddenly and never returned. Most locals had forgotten about it because the property had slowly turned into an old, silent place covered in dust, weeds, and stillness. But for Ethan, something about the ranch felt special. The moment he saw the pictures, a quiet excitement filled his heart. He could imagine what the place once looked like: fresh paint on the fences, animals roaming the fields, sunlight touching the windows. Even though the place was worn down, he could picture the beauty it still held underneath. Ethan drove out to see the ranch in person. It was a long drive, and he kept thinking about whether he was making the right decision. He wasn't used to buying large properties, and he wasn't sure what he would do with it. But when he finally arrived, the sight of the open fields and clear sky made him feel calm in a way he hadn't felt in years. The breeze was soft, the land was quiet, and there was something peaceful about the area. Everything seemed untouched, almost frozen in time. He walked around, observing the old buildings. The main house stood at the center, its walls faded but still strong. The windows were dusty, the porch creaked lightly, and the yard was filled with dry leaves. The small barn on the side looked like it once held animals or tools. A shed near the fence leaned slightly to one side but still stood in place. Though everything looked abandoned, Ethan felt that the ranch still had a kind of gentle charm hiding behind the dust. He didn't go inside the house during that first visit. The real estate agent had told him the interior needed cleaning and repairs, and Ethan didn't have much time that day. He only walked around the outside, imagining the possibilities. He thought about planting flowers along the porch, repainting the walls, and maybe keeping a few animals someday. Even with the worn-down appearance, he saw a future in the ranch. Something inside him whispered that the land was worth saving. The price was surprisingly low because no one else wanted to restore an abandoned place. But for Ethan, that low price meant hope. It meant he could afford to buy it without waiting another 10 years. After thinking quietly for a while, he took a deep breath and made the decision. It felt like he was taking a step toward a new chapter of his life, one with peace, quiet, and a sense of purpose. The paperwork was completed within a week. Ethan officially became the owner of the ranch. He told himself he would return soon to start cleaning and renovating. But then work began pulling him in different directions again. New tasks, deadlines, and meetings filled his schedule. He planned to visit the ranch every weekend. But each weekend, something urgent came up. Days went by, then weeks. He kept promising himself that he would go soon, but somehow time kept slipping away from him. During this time, he only thought of the ranch through memories of that peaceful first visit. Whenever work felt stressful, he would imagine the open land, the quiet sky, and the old house waiting for him. He told himself he would definitely go in a few days. But those few days kept stretching, and he stayed away longer than he planned. While he stayed busy, the ranch quietly remained standing in its lonely spot. The fields stayed still, the walls waited silently, and no one expected anything unusual to happen. Ethan assumed it stayed just as he last saw it, empty, quiet, untouched. He had no idea that things were slowly shifting without his knowledge. One afternoon, he received a call from a man who lived near the ranch. The neighbor, an older gentleman with a friendly voice, casually mentioned that he had seen lights around the house at night. Ethan became confused. He knew he hadn't given the keys to anyone, and he had definitely not visited recently. But he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He politely thanked the neighbor and assumed the man had simply seen lights from a passing car or maybe some reflection from far away. A few days later, another neighbor left a short voice message saying she heard voices near the barn during the evening. She thought maybe someone was fixing something there. Ethan listened to the message twice, unsure of what to think. Voices, lights, activity. The ranch was supposed to be empty. He wondered if kids in the town had been exploring the place, which was common in old abandoned areas, or maybe travelers had accidentally wandered near the property. He didn't feel worried, just puzzled. He knew old buildings sometimes made strange sounds when wind moved through them. Lights could also be caused by random reflections, especially during certain weather. He didn't want to overthink. He decided to trust that everything was fine. But even though he brushed off the comments, a small curiosity began forming inside him. He thought about the abandoned house sitting alone. If someone truly had entered, why would they choose an empty ranch? Still, he convinced himself that he was worrying for no real reason. He kept telling himself he would visit soon anyway. He would check everything, clean up, and restore the place step by step. The weeks continued passing. Ethan finally reached a point where he couldn't delay anymore. He missed the quiet feeling he had felt during his first visit. He wanted to breathe that peaceful air again. So one evening, after finishing work, he decided that he would go the next morning. No delays, no excuses. He packed a few supplies, gloves, cleaning tools, snacks, a flashlight, and prepared for the long drive. That night he felt strangely excited. He lay in bed imagining the moment he would unlock the door for the first time. He pictured cleaning the dust, opening the windows, letting sunlight in, and beginning a fresh chapter. He had no idea what awaited him there. He believed he would find nothing but quiet air and untouched rooms. But fate had planned something entirely different for him. Ethan woke up early the next morning, feeling more refreshed than he had in weeks. For the first time in a long while, he was actually excited about something. His mind kept returning to the ranch, the quiet fields, the old house, and the peaceful silence that surrounded the entire place. He felt as if the land was calling him back, reminding him that he had left a dream waiting there. He made himself a simple breakfast, grabbed his keys, and headed out before the sun fully rose. The drive was long, but the roads were calm. As he drove, he thought about the strange messages he had received from the neighbors, the lights someone claimed to have seen, the voices another neighbor mentioned. Ethan still didn't understand them, yet he wasn't worried. He believed everything must have a very simple explanation. Maybe the neighbor had seen the light from a passing vehicle. Maybe the voices had come from hikers or travelers walking nearby. The ranch sat near a long, open road, and it wasn't unusual for people to pass through the surrounding area. Ethan kept telling himself that nothing unusual was going on. It was an old place. Old buildings sometimes created illusions, echoes, and strange reflections. He convinced himself it was nothing. But even as he tried to push away the thoughts, a tiny feeling of curiosity rested quietly in the back of his mind. Not fear, just curiosity. Something inside him wanted to know why two different people had noticed unusual things around a place that was supposed to be completely empty. Ethan wasn't the type of person to jump to conclusions, so he simply took it as a sign that he needed to visit sooner rather than later. As he drove, the sun slowly rose higher in the sky. Warm light touched the open fields and long roads, giving the morning a peaceful glow. It had been weeks since he'd last taken such a long, quiet drive. Usually, his drives involved city traffic, honking horns, and crowded intersections, but today felt different. Today felt calm. He rolled down the window and let fresh air fill the car. It made him feel good, light, almost hopeful. After a couple of hours, he finally reached the small town near the ranch. He passed by the familiar grocery store, the old gas station, and the tiny community park. People walked around slowly, carrying bags, greeting each other or enjoying the morning sun. The town always gave him a feeling of warmth, even though he didn't live there. Life in this place seemed simple and peaceful, something Ethan always admired. He waved at the older gentleman who had called him about the lights. The man waved back with a friendly smile. Ethan thought about stopping to ask more questions, but he decided to wait until he had seen everything himself. He believed it would be better to observe first and talk later. He drove past the last group of houses and onto the long dirt road that led to his ranch. Every bump, every turn felt familiar, as though he were returning to a place he knew deeply. When the ranch finally came into view, Ethan slowed the car and took a deep breath. The fields looked exactly how he remembered: wide, open, and quiet. The old fence stood along the edges, still leaning in a few places. The barn stood still, just as weathered as before, but nothing seemed damaged or out of place from a distance. He parked the car in the same spot as his first visit. For a moment, he sat quietly inside the car, listening to the soft hum of the wind outside. Everything appeared calm. If someone had been around recently, there were no visible signs he could see immediately. The sunlight touched the house gently, making it look warmer and more welcoming than during his first visit. Still, Ethan couldn't ignore the small details the neighbors had mentioned. He stepped out of the car and looked toward the windows. There was nothing unusual, just dust and old glass reflecting the sun. He walked slowly toward the house, observing the ground as he went. The dirt near the steps looked like it had been disturbed recently, but he wasn't sure. It could have been the wind or animals passing by. He crouched down and brushed the dirt lightly with his fingers, trying to make sense of it. He didn't find anything worrying, so he stood up again and continued walking around the house. He checked the porch, the outer walls, and the windows. Everything seemed normal, although he did notice that one of the windows looked cleaner than before. He remembered dust covering everything on his first visit, but this particular window looked like someone had wiped it or touched it. Ethan stood still for a moment, trying to recall every detail from weeks ago. Had it really been dusty, or had he simply imagined it? He couldn't be sure. Ethan walked toward the barn next. He had always been curious about what was inside, even though he hadn't checked during his first visit. The barn door was closed, but he noticed faint marks near the handle, as if someone had touched it recently. He paused and listened carefully. But he didn't hear anything inside, only the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. He looked around the property again. The air felt fresh, and the morning light made everything look calm. But at the same time, the unusual details left him with a quiet question in his mind. Had someone actually been here? He walked toward the back of the house, where a small water tank and an old bench stood. The bench looked like it had been moved slightly. He remembered seeing it leaning against the wall during his first visit, but now it was angled differently. A small flower pot sat near the bench, and it looked newer than the surrounding area. Ethan didn't recall seeing it before. Someone must have placed it there recently. But who? The feeling of curiosity that had been resting quietly inside him began to grow. Ethan wasn't scared, just puzzled. Everything was peaceful, nothing was damaged, and there were no signs of anything harmful. But the details added up slowly in his mind. The lights, the voices, the cleaned window, the moved bench. Each small piece suggested that someone might have been staying there or visiting. Before checking the inside of the house, Ethan took a slow walk around the entire property. He looked carefully at the fences, the shed, and the back fields. He saw nothing alarming, only small hints that someone had been present. Whoever had been there seemed gentle, careful, and respectful. No trash, no damage, nothing messy, only small signs of tidiness. This made Ethan even more curious. If someone had entered, they weren't behaving like someone who wanted to cause trouble. They seemed more like visitors who treated the place kindly. After a full hour of inspecting the outside area, Ethan finally stood in front of the main door. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the keys, and held them firmly. This was the moment he had been waiting for since the day he bought the ranch, the moment he would step inside for the first time. But now, the feeling was different. When he first bought the place, he imagined walking into an empty home filled with dust and silence. But after hearing the neighbors' stories and noticing the small changes around the ranch, he wasn't sure what he would find. He took a deep breath, placed the key in the lock, and turned it slowly. Whatever waited behind that door was going to change the entire direction of his journey, and he didn't even realize it yet. Ethan stood at the front door with the key still inside the lock. For a moment, he didn't move. The quietness around him felt deeper than usual, as if the whole ranch was holding its breath. The wind slowed, the trees barely moved, and even the birds nearby seemed to pause. Ethan gently pushed the door open, expecting to see dust floating in the sunlight and empty rooms waiting patiently after years of silence. But the moment the door opened wider, something felt different. The air inside didn't smell like an abandoned place. Instead of the usual old, closed-up scent, there was a faint freshness, almost like someone had opened the windows recently. Ethan frowned slightly, surprised. He took a careful step inside, his shoes pressing lightly against the wooden floor. He stopped just 2 steps in. The living room was not how he imagined it. He had expected dust, spiderwebs, and untouched furniture, but instead, he saw small signs of life everywhere. A folded blanket lay neatly on the couch. A pair of shoes sat near the wall. The floor looked swept and the air felt warmer, as if someone had been inside only a short time ago. Ethan's heart beat a little faster, not with fear, but with strong confusion. He took another step and looked around more carefully. Everything seemed clean. Not perfect or fully arranged, but definitely cared for. There were no broken things, no mess, no scattered belongings. Just quiet signs of people living simply and respectfully. He cleared his throat softly, nervous but wanting to announce his presence. "Hello?" he called out gently, his voice echoing slightly in the hallway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from one of the rooms toward the back, he heard faint whispering. The sound froze him in place. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. Someone was definitely inside. Ethan stood still, unsure of what to do next. The whispers grew a little clearer, then fell silent again. He could tell the voices were calm, not afraid, not shouting, just soft, surprised murmurs. Ethan took another slow breath and stepped farther into the house. He wasn't angry, just puzzled. He had never imagined that someone would choose to stay here. The ranch had been empty for years, and no one had shown interest in it for so long. He walked past the small dining area, his eyes scanning the neatly stacked cups, the swept floor, and the tidy chairs. Everything looked like someone had actually been living here quietly, peacefully. He took a few more steps toward the hallway, and suddenly, 4 figures appeared. 4 women stood near the doorway of the back room, looking just as surprised as Ethan. They didn't come forward immediately. They simply stood there, unsure of what to say. Their expressions were calm but cautious, and Ethan could tell they hadn't expected anyone to enter so suddenly. For a few seconds, no one moved. Ethan blinked, trying to understand what he was seeing. The women looked neat and calm, each with different expressions. One seemed curious, another looked nervous, one looked thoughtful, and the 4th seemed quietly hopeful. None of them looked harmful or unsafe. Instead, they looked like people who didn't know where else to go. Finally, Ethan spoke first, his voice gentle and respectful. I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't know anyone was here. This is actually my property. I bought it recently." His words surprised the women. They exchanged glances, as if confirming something silently among themselves. Then the woman who stood closest to the front spoke with a calm voice. "We didn't know someone had bought it," she said quietly. We thought the ranch was empty. We didn't mean any trouble. We only came because we needed a safe place to stay for a while." Her tone was sincere, and Ethan could tell immediately that they were not people who wanted to cause problems. They looked like individuals who had experienced challenges, maybe more than he could guess. Their clothes were clean but simple, and they all seemed polite and careful. Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process everything. He had expected to find an empty house waiting for repairs. Instead, he had found 4 strangers who had made the place feel alive again. He didn't speak right away. He didn't want to make them uncomfortable or scared. He simply wanted to understand. The second woman stepped forward slightly, her hands held together nervously. "We didn't touch anything important," she said. "We cleaned a little, just enough to stay here safely. We weren't planning to stay forever." Ethan looked around the room again. It was true. Their presence hadn't damaged anything. In fact, things looked better than when he first saw the place. The dust was gone, the furniture looked cared for, and the air felt fresh. They had treated the ranch with respect. He turned back to them with a calm expression. "How long have you been here?" he asked quietly. The third woman answered this time. She spoke softly, choosing her words carefully. "A few weeks," she said. "We didn't know who owned it. We just needed a place to rest. Life has been a little difficult for us recently, and we didn't want to bother anyone." Ethan listened carefully. Their words sounded truthful. He didn't sense any hidden intentions. He could see from their eyes that they were speaking from honesty and perhaps relief. Relief that he wasn't reacting harshly or angrily. He leaned slightly against the doorway, his voice still gentle. "You all look like you've been taking care of the house," he said. "It looks better than before." The fourth woman, who had been quiet, finally spoke with a soft smile. "We tried," she said. "It felt wrong to stay somewhere and not take care of it. We cleaned a little each day. We wanted to keep everything neat." Ethan felt a mix of emotions: surprise, understanding, and a sense of responsibility. He knew he still needed to think about what to do next, but he also knew he wasn't going to react harshly or make them feel unwelcome suddenly. They hadn't caused harm. Instead, they had cared for a place that had been forgotten for years. He took a slow breath and spoke again. "Thank you for being honest with me," he said kindly. "I'm not upset. I just need to understand your situation better. Then we can figure out what to do together." The women relaxed slightly at his gentle tone. They stepped out of the doorway, allowing Ethan to enter the living room fully. The room looked peaceful, filled with a quiet sense of life. The sunlight coming through the windows touched the clean surfaces softly. Everything felt unexpectedly warm. Ethan realized in that moment that the ranch was no longer abandoned. These 4 women had given it life again. They had found comfort in a place he hadn't even been able to visit for weeks. And although he had come to start his plans alone, life had brought him something completely different, something that would shape his journey in a new and unexpected way. He didn't know where this story was going to lead, but he knew one thing clearly. This moment was the beginning of a change he never anticipated. Ethan stood quietly in the living room, still trying to understand everything he had just heard. The 4 women sat carefully on the chairs and couch, looking calm but a little nervous. They didn't know how he would react after learning their stories. Ethan took a seat as well, wanting to listen with an open mind. He could tell they weren't trying to hide anything. Their eyes held honesty, and their voices were gentle. They seemed like people who simply wanted a place where they could feel safe again. The first woman, named Mira, spoke softly. She explained that she had been moving from one temporary place to another for months. She didn't have a stable home and had lost her job earlier in the year. One afternoon, she passed by the empty ranch while walking along the road. She saw how peaceful the land looked. Curious, she checked the porch and peeked inside through a dusty window. When she entered the house, she found it empty but calm. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of safety. She spent that night there, and it felt like a small break from all the worry she had been carrying. The second woman, named Leela, had met Mira by chance in town a few days later. They had been standing in the same cafe line and started talking about life, challenges, and dreams. When Mira mentioned the ranch, Lila asked if she could join her for a few days. She had been dealing with family issues and needed a quiet place where she could think clearly. The ranch sounded peaceful, so she decided to go with Mira. The third woman, named Hannah, was traveling through the area when she met the other two near a small grocery store. She was new to the town and was looking for a place to rest. When she learned they were staying in an unused ranch, she hesitated at first. She didn't want to intrude, but she felt tired, mentally and physically. Eventually, she accepted their invitation to stay temporarily, just until she figured out her next step. The fourth woman, Nina, had joined them last. She had been living in a small rented room earlier, but the owner needed the place back suddenly. With nowhere else to go and very little money left, she had been sitting on a park bench when the other three found her. They saw that she looked worried and lost. When they offered her a place to stay for a little while, she couldn't stop herself from crying softly out of relief. She didn't know them well at the time, but she felt grateful for their kindness. As each woman explained her story, Ethan felt his heart soften even more. None of them were trying to take advantage of his property. They were simply people who had gone through difficult situations and needed a safe corner of the world to breathe again. They spoke with sincerity, not expecting anything from him other than understanding. What surprised Ethan even more was the effort they had put into caring for the house. Mira explained how they had cleaned the floors every day because dust collected easily. Lila described how she had washed the curtains with water collected from a nearby store because she wanted the sunlight to enter more clearly. Hannah had fixed a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet using an old screwdriver she found in the shed. Nina had swept the porch every evening, saying it helped her feel calm. Ethan listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. Every detail they shared made it clear that they respected the place. They hadn't treated it like an abandoned property, but like a temporary home they were grateful for. Ethan felt a quiet warmth forming inside him. The ranch had been lifeless for years, forgotten by everyone. But these four women had brought life into the empty rooms again. They had filled the silence with gentle conversation, small laughter, and soft footsteps. He looked around the room once more, noticing the sunlight falling gently across the wooden floor. It felt different now, brighter, softer, more human. The ranch no longer seemed abandoned. It seemed lived in, not in a messy or careless way, but in a peaceful, respectful way. The room fell silent for a moment. The women waited, wondering what Ethan would decide. They didn't want to be a burden. They didn't want to cause trouble. They simply hoped he would understand their situation and give them time to find their next steps. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "Thank you for telling me everything," he said in a calm voice. "I can see you all have been through a lot." The women nodded slowly, unsure of what he would say next. "I want you to know," Ethan continued, "that I appreciate the way you've taken care of the ranch. You kept it clean and respected the place. I can see that clearly." Their faces softened with relief. It meant a lot to them that he noticed their efforts. He gently asked how they had managed food and supplies. Mira explained that they took small jobs around town, helping at the cafe, organizing shelves at a shop, doing light cleaning for residents. They earned just enough to buy simple groceries and a few necessary items. They never used anything inside the house that didn't belong to them. They kept everything simple. Ethan nodded slowly, admiring their honesty. He realized that the ranch had become more than a shelter for them. It had become a place where they could rebuild their strength and find a little hope again. He looked out the window for a moment, watching the sunlight touch the fields. The ranch had always felt peaceful to him. even when it was empty. Now that peacefulness seemed fuller because it was tied to real stories, real people, real emotions. When he turned back to the women, his voice was gentle but sure. "I'll think about what's best for everyone," he said. "I don't want any of you to feel stressed or unsafe. We'll find a solution that works well." The women exchanged relieved glances. They didn't expect him to make an immediate decision. They only needed kindness, and Ethan was giving them that. His calm manner made them feel lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Ethan asked if he could look around the rest of the house. They nodded politely and stepped aside. He walked through each room slowly, noticing more small signs of care. The kitchen counters were wiped clean. A few simple dishes were stacked neatly near the sink. A couple of blankets were folded carefully in one room. Not much, but everything looked gentle and clean. The house felt warm, with a quiet energy that made him feel unexpectedly comfortable. As Ethan walked through the back hallway, he realized something important. The ranch, which once felt abandoned and empty, now felt alive in a soft, peaceful way. He had bought the property thinking he would start a quiet life alone, but life had placed something unexpected in his hands, something human, something meaningful. When he returned to the living room, the women looked at him with patient eyes. He smiled softly, not a loud or dramatic smile, but a calm one filled with understanding. "I can see that you've treated the house with care," he said, "and I want you to know that I respect that." Their eyes brightened slightly, grateful for his kindness. He continued, "Let's sit together later and talk about a proper plan. I want everyone to feel safe, and I also want the ranch to be used responsibly." The women nodded with relief. They didn't know what the future would hold, but Ethan's gentle nature already made them feel hopeful. As they spoke a little more about their daily routines, Ethan listened carefully. He admired their resilience, their strength, and their respectful approach to life. Each woman had faced challenges, yet they remained polite, positive, and warm-hearted. Ethan felt a quiet realization forming inside him. Maybe their paths crossing was not an accident. Maybe the ranch was meant to offer them a moment of rest, and maybe he was meant to give them understanding. What had started as an unexpected discovery was slowly turning into something deeper, a connection, a new beginning, and a chance for everyone to rebuild a part of their lives. And as the sun continued shining through the windows, Ethan knew his next decisions would shape not only his future, but theirs as well. Ethan woke up early the next morning with a calm mind for the first time in many weeks. The sun was rising slowly, filling the sky with soft colors, light orange, a little pink, and a peaceful shade of gold. He stood at the ranch door and looked out at the land that had once been broken, abandoned, and silent. Now it felt alive again. The house was full, the ranch was busy, the animals were active, and the four women who had once been strangers were moving around like they had lived there forever. The quiet morning made him think about how unusual his journey had been. When he had first purchased the abandoned ranch, he had never imagined any of this. He had only wanted a quiet place to restart his life. He had wanted peace, space, and time to think. But life had given him something different, something he did not expect, but something that changed him in a good way. A soft smell of breakfast reached him. It was probably Grace cooking again. She had taken over the kitchen so quickly that it felt like she had always belonged there. Ethan walked inside and found Grace at the stove, Elena setting the table, Maya opening the windows to let in the morning breeze, and Nora talking with cheerful energy as always. They were laughing about some small joke, something simple, something normal, but it warmed the whole room. The moment they saw Ethan, they smiled as if he was already a part of their morning routine. Ethan sat down as Elena placed a cup of tea in front of him. She said it gently, like someone who truly cared about his comfort. It surprised him how natural it felt to be surrounded by them now. Only a few weeks ago, they had been unknown people living secretly in his ranch. Now they were part of his daily life. As they all ate breakfast together, the conversation moved easily from one topic to another. They talked about what needed to be done on the ranch today, about the little repairs, about the new garden area they wanted to build, and even about small dreams they hoped to fulfill. Nora had a way of turning every idea into something exciting. Maya always added thoughtful and practical suggestions. Elena focused on tiny details that made everything better, and Grace somehow kept everyone calm and balanced. Ethan listened, and he felt something new inside him, a kind of belonging he had not felt for a long time. After breakfast, they gathered outside to continue the work they had started earlier. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the land seemed to welcome the new energy flowing through it. They moved like a team without needing detailed instructions. Grace cleaned the tools, the way she always liked things neat. Maya checked the fences again. Nora painted the outside wall where the wood had faded. Elena planted new flowers along the path leading to the house. Ethan worked with them, fixing some old boards near the barn. As he worked, he kept glancing at the four women. He remembered the first time he had seen them in the house. That moment of shock, confusion, and disbelief. He never expected that moment to lead to all of this. Later in the day, Maya came over to help him lift a heavy wooden beam. She worked quietly beside him, and together they placed the beam in its place. When they finished, she smiled softly. Ethan noticed how much stronger and more confident she had become since the day he first met her. Whatever difficult past she carried, the ranch was giving her space to rebuild herself. Elena joined them, holding a notebook in her hand. She had made a list of small improvements they could do over the next few weeks. Her handwriting was neat and organized. Ethan admired her careful planning. Each item on the list was something that would make the ranch feel more like a home. Nora ran across the yard excitedly as she called them to come look at something. She had discovered a small area behind the barn where wildflowers grew naturally. The colors were bright and refreshing. She suggested turning that area into a little rest spot with chairs and maybe a small table. Her excitement was contagious, and everyone agreed immediately. Grace came over with fresh lemonade for everyone, reminding them to drink water and rest. She had turned into the peaceful center of the group, always watching out for them, always making sure everyone was doing well. As they sat under the shade for a short break, Grace looked at Ethan and said softly, "You changed this place, but this place changed us too." Ethan didn't know how to respond at first. He wasn't sure he deserved the credit, but the genuine warmth in her eyes made him feel something deep and honest. The day passed with steady work, shared efforts, and simple joy. By late afternoon, the ranch looked more organized than ever. The fences were cleaned, the garden area had new plants, the barn had fresh wooden beams, and the house had small touches that made it feel warm and lived in. Ethan stood on the porch and slowly took in everything they had accomplished together. He could hear the soft voices of the women inside as they talked, laughed, and prepared for evening. It felt peaceful in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the evening sun painted the entire sky in warm golden light, they all gathered outside for dinner. Maya and Nora had prepared simple food, and Elena had arranged everything neatly on a wooden table. Grace lit a small lantern that gave a soft glow to the space. They sat together and ate, talking about how far things had come. They spoke about their past only as much as they were comfortable. They talked more about their future, what they hoped for, and what they wanted to build. For the first time, Ethan realized that he was no longer alone in his journey. They weren't just living in the ranch. They were building something with him, something meaningful, something lasting. After dinner, they took a walk around the property together. The moon was bright, and the air was cool. They walked slowly, without rushing, enjoying the quiet and the closeness of the moment. Nora talked about decorating the barn interior to make it more cheerful. Maya suggested creating a vegetable garden in the open space near the fence. Elena wanted to add lights along the path so it would look beautiful at night. Grace said she wanted to plant fruit trees that would grow strong for years. Ethan listened to each idea, and he felt grateful, not just for their ideas, but for their presence. As they walked back toward the house, he realized how much everything had changed. A few months ago, the ranch had been empty and forgotten. Now it was full of life, purpose, and connection. When they finally reached the porch, the women went inside one by one. Ethan stayed outside for a moment longer. He looked at the stars above him, at the quiet land around him, and at the warm lights glowing from the windows of the house. He knew that the ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It was a home. And the 4 women who once entered secretly were now a part of that home in a way he never expected. He took a deep breath, feeling the calm night settle around him. Whatever the future brought, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The ranch had brought them together, and now they were building a new chapter side by side. Ethan smiled quietly to himself and stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him as the peaceful night embraced the ranch that had brought 5 lives together in the most unexpected way.